what is the best way to learn Linux? Me and Mimar, we're going to go over a couple of different ways to get your feet wet, so to speak, and learn how to be more comfortable and learn how to use Linux. So first and foremost, you have to go into this with a certain kind of mindset. You have to be willing to learn. Like, people are afraid of Linux because they're afraid of things they don't understand, or they're afraid of unfamiliarity. You have to be able to go in with a learning mindset. Unfortunately, schools and cultures kind of cultivate this idea that failure is bad. Oh no, you got an F, you're stupid. It's the contrary if you think about it, though. Failure is not supposed to be a bad thing. It's supposed to be a step in the learning process. People don't just immediately know how to do things. You have to fuck up. You have to mess up to learn how to do things. Now, how do you learn how to ride a bike? You get on the bike, you ride the bike, and you fall. Like, that's how you learn. You figure out what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do. It's called trial and error. Yeah, the start sucks because no one likes to feel stupid. It always sucks when you feel like a noob with anything. If you know how to drive a car, how did you learn how to drive a car? By driving. First few times that you do it, it's scary and it sucks. First time you get into your accident, it's terrifying. Over time, you drive and you probably don't even think about what you need to do to drive. You just drive. You probably have conversations with people in the passenger seat or in the phone while you're driving. It just becomes natural. And it's like that with anything, Linux included. Again, you gotta have that mindset, right? The easiest comparison, and probably the one that's thrown around, is comparing Linux to Dark Souls or Monster Hunter. Yeah, it's challenging. Yes, it can be difficult, depending on what your use case is and depending on what you demand of your system. But the feeling of accomplishment when you take down your first Cutku in Monster Hunter, or take down a boss in Dark Souls, it's fantastic. It feels good. It's an enjoyable feeling. You have to have the right mindset. You have to have a willingness to learn and explore your system. You'll enjoy that feeling of accomplishment when you figure out how to fix it if your system does break. My cousin not too long ago did something with his system. I have no idea what it was. His package manager was gone. He had to go and reinstall his package manager. But he did it without me. He did it without asking me. I would at least like to think he feels really good about being able to accomplish that. I'm actually kind of proud of him. I didn't find out until after he fixed his system. Congrats if you're watching, hear this. Another thing too, that sometimes people say they don't have time to figure these things out. I get it if your system or your computer is something that you need for work, you need for school, you pay the bills with it. Yeah, of course you don't want something like Linux on your everyday or your daily driver, something that you depend on for, again, school work or paying bills. I would not recommend that if that's the case. Look, you could learn Linux in a lot of different ways, in a way that's not scary. One of those ways is you can install it on spare hardware. Whether it be a laptop that's old and was going to get thrown out, or it could be another desktop that had so much hardware from friends and family like you couldn't believe. But even if you don't, let's say you don't have any spare hardware, all you have is that one computer or one laptop in your home, and that's it. That's all you've got. Even then, there's still ways that you could safely try out Linux without any kind of fear of breaking anything. One, you can run it from a USB. You can run a live environment of whatever operating system or any Linux operating system you want to try out, preferably with Ventoy. That way you could try out different distributions without having to keep flashing the USB drive over and over and over again. Or if you don't want to do that, you could just simply install it on a virtual box. There's VMware. Those are two that you can use on Windows. Or if you have a hypervisor like Proxmox installed on a spare PC, and you can run Linux off of a virtual machine off of those. I highly recommend actually running Linux to try and learn it, because then you're going to be able to kind of figure out what your use case is and what your needs are. For example, Ubuntu and Linux Mint, or like these kinds of distributions, the general use of the computer, like everyday use, very rare that it'll need a terminal. This doesn't mean that you're never going to need the terminal. At some point, you are going to need to use the terminal when you have to do something serious with your system, or if an update breaks or something along those lines. There's going to be a point where you're going to need to use that terminal. Now, does that mean you have to use the terminal for everything? No, but there will be a point in time where you need to use it. People are afraid of things they don't understand. They're afraid of unfamiliarity. So it is probably a good idea to learn to get comfortable with the terminal sooner rather than later, because it sucks when you can't use your system and you're kind of forced into it. Yes, you're going to learn, but it still sucks. If you don't want to learn by doing or by using, there's a couple of different resources online online that kind of help learning how to do this stuff, but without having to run Linux as your system. You know, one of them is Linux Journey. Okay, so this is Linux Journey. It is a very easy, very simple way of learning a little bit more about Linux without actually having to install anything. Now, this is a good first step because it just kind of goes over things with you. For example, on getting started, it'll go over the history of Linux, the concept of a distribution, and some different distributions and how they work, what kind of options you can use them for. Spoiler, most of them can be used for, you know, laptops and desktops. Obviously, some of them might cater more towards server and stability, while others might be catering more towards flexibility. There's so many distributions. Let's go back, and then you can click on the command line, and then it'll go over a shell. For example, let's see, depending on the distribution, your shell prompt might change, but for the most part, it should adhere to the following format. You know what you could do? You could install VMware or VirtualBox or some sort of virtual machine software, spin up Linux, and then you can kind of follow along. You know, you could pop a terminal within Linux, and you could do stuff like there you go. Echo obviously just prints out, and it seems kind of useless, but when you combine Echo with other commands, you could start to do some really fun stuff. And it says exercises, let's do date, Wednesday, June, whatever, and there you go. Okay, and then you can, there's a little quiz here. So for example, when you what should be outputted to the display when you type echo hello world? And that would be, of course, hello world. Okay, so PWD. You should not memorize any of these. What you should do is, over time of using the terminal, you'll understand the context in which you would use these commands, and it will come to you in second nature. Obviously, the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, you know, I don't know, 10, who knows how many times. But after a certain point, you are going to just kind of remember them. And honestly, you shouldn't remember all of these things. You know, that's what the manual is for. That's what Google is for. What you should be really trying to do is just understand what these things do. So print working directory, there's the home directory, right? You know, and you can kind of, hold on, how do you find what directory you're currently in? That's PWD. Alright, CD is to change directory. So, did I close out? I think I closed out the terminal. Alright, there we go. Alright, so we can, like, let's say for example, change directory. Well, I know, so I have a Git folder. I don't know if you saw the other video that I did in regards to using the AUR, but I have a Git folder, and then this, I can ls to list directories like it shows over here. And again, it just goes over all of these commands and what they do. So once you've gone through, you know, all of this, and it really starts to, okay, so remember I was talking about Echo, and Echo hello world, all it does is print out hello world. So what kind of use, how is that useful? Well, now what you can do is you can echo hello world, and then this right here, okay, will go ahead and input that into a file called peanuts.txt. So this is pretty cool. This is pretty neat. This is a nice, very easy, digestible way to kind of learn how to manipulate the system through the command line. And like I said, you can have this open while you have your Linux system in a virtual machine or in a live environment. Oh, you could do that. You could load up your Linux distro of choice in the live environment, and then you can go ahead and you can mess around with all of these commands and mess around with the terminal. You know, you could do stuff like that. So the next one, let's say say you don't want to download Linux. Let's say you don't want to run a virtual machine or anything like that. Well, you could at least do this one, which is Linux Survival. Linux Survival is a free tutorial designed to make it as easy as possible to learn Linux. Even though Linux has hundreds of commands, there are only about a dozen you need to know to perform the most basic tasks. This tutorial uses a simulated Linux terminal, so you could practice what you learned. To try out, type ls without the quotations next to the zoo prompt in the terminal and then hit enter. In this case, we can go ahead and type ls. Hey, there we go. To find out what the ls command actually does, click on the right arrow to go to the next page. So before we explore the commands used to manipulate a Linux environment, so this is pretty nice because it's kind of like Linux Journey, but it allows you to actually try out the commands in a simulated terminal. This will take you at least to doing some of the basics. Yes, man pages. I kind of almost forgot that. So, man pages, or the man command, all right, is short for manual. And if you're ever confused or stuck or anything like that in regards to what or how to do something, you could always type man, and then in this case, we'll just use Pacman. Pacman is the package manager for Arch. Package manager, Pacman, that's the name of the command or package manager. Here's your descriptions, operations. So this is definitely not written in a in a language that humans can probably understand, but you know, with some time you'll get an idea, and it's pretty in depth how it works. So let's do this. Okay, and then lastly, once you've kind of gone through and you're getting a little bit more comfortable or a little bit more familiar with the command line, you can check out Over the Wire Bandit. Once you've kind of gone through Linux Journey or Linux Survival, I'm more of a hands-on person. I like to learn by doing. Linux Journey is a nice way to start, but I think I like Linux Survival a little bit better. That's kind of my cup of tea. But once you've gone through one or both of these, then I think you would be ready for Over the Wire Bandit. Basically, they have it set up like a game where you SSH into the system and you go through each of these levels, and it even tells you helpful commands, and each of these commands has, you know, it links to the manual so you can take a look at it and see what it does. It's pretty neat. I hope I was able to take away some of the fear using the terminal, and if so, and if you feel ready to jump in, I have a video here on how to make a bootable USB drive, which is the first step you will need if you do plan on installing Linux. Aside from that, have a good one.